Now, obviously, Angular comes with its own router. However, the Angular UI router is a little bit different and has some other features, and we're going to look at a basic example of how to use it in this screencast. So I've copied our template into a router project here, and let's go ahead and do bower install Angular UI router. And now let's open up the index.html file, and we don't need utilities, but we do need router. So we'll go ahead and replace it. And I happen to know this is at Angular UI router /release/ Angular-UI-router.min.js. Excellent. Now, the UI router is not based around the route terminology that the default Angular router is based around. It uses the term state to refer to the different pages or states of our application. So let's go ahead and open up our application.js file, and we won't forget to require UI router. And then we actually don't need our controller at all for this screencast. Instead, we're going to have a config block. And our config function here will take the state provider. And this is the way that we can create our different states. So we have state provider, and this object has a state function, which we pass an object to. So we'll start by naming the state. We give it a name attribute, and we will call it home. And from here on, this is how we will refer to this state with the keyword home. So we also want to give it a URL, and for us, that'll just be the home route. And then finally, we can give it a template. And in the style of regular Angular routes, we can either give it a template URL, which will be a path to a template, or we can just pass a template string right in here. And for us, we're just going to do a template string, and we'll just pass an h1 that says home. Now we can chain on another .state call and create a second state. And this state, we can actually give it the name as a first parameter and pass the options as an object. So for example, let's say we want to have an about page. So we can give it a URL of /about, and then let's give it a template. We'll just do the same thing again. And with this in place, let's go ahead and go back to our index.html file here. And right here we have our main controller. Let's actually get rid of that main controller. And instead we will have a div with a UI-view attribute. Now, you know, if we were using a normal Angular router, we would have ngView, but since we're using the UI router, it's called UIView. Now, above this, let me just add an unordered list, and we will put two links in here. The first one will go to #/ and that will be a link to the home page. And the second one will be #/ about, and that will be a link to the about page. So now, if we open this web page up in our browser, you can see we have our two links here, and currently the div with our UIView directive is empty, but if I click home, you can see our home template is being displayed, and if I click about, our about template is being displayed. Now, one thing to note here is that we've had to create our anchor tags here with the proper paths. So because we're not using HTML5 routing, we have to put the # in here. And if we ever needed to change these, for example, over in our state objects here, these would have to change here. This seems to be a little poorly designed. Well, the UI router gives us another directive that we can use in place of href, and it will make things a little bit easier. And that is the UI-sref. And this stands for UI state reference. And instead of putting the actual route, instead we put the name of the route. So the name here is home, or the name about, we put those instead. So here, this will be home. And then down here, a UI-stateref, and this is about. And now, if I refresh this page, you can see we have home and about, and those are working out just fine. Now, what about routes that are not a single static word like about or just route? Well, we can handle those too. Let's create another state here. And this state, we'll just call it user view state, for example. And this is where we want to view a single user, for example. So we'll say the URL is going to be /user/user ID. And of course, like most routing systems, the :user ID here is a token that will be replaced with something else. But then once we get the user ID in our route, we need a way to actually get that user ID and find, say, the user record in a database that matches that user ID. So let me paste in a little user data here at the top, just a small array with 3 users up above here. So now back in our user view state here, we need to give this state a controller. Now we could either put a function in line here, or we can put a reference to the user view controller. And that's what we're going to do here. So down below, let's create a controller that we'll call user view controller. And our callback function here will not just take a scope, it will also take $state params. And this state params object will be whatever parameters are provided in our URL here. So down here, $scope.user equals, and we'll just say users, which is the object we created up at the top here. And we can just pass it $state params.user ID. Now, of course, this state doesn't have a template yet, so let's go ahead and add a template right there. And let's just have an h1, and we can say user name, and then maybe in a paragraph after that, we can have user ID. Excellent, just like that. And now if we come back to our web page here and we go to /user/1, you can see we get Joe Smith. If we go to 2, Polly Perkins, and finally 3 gives us Joan Watson. So that is a look at the core features of the Angular UI router. There are a few other features that I'm not mentioning here that you can check out in the documentation, but overall, I think it's a very nice replacement for the native Angular router.